Good evening, I'm Joe Fryer coming to you from NBC News headquarters in New York. Here are some of the stories we are following now tonight. Actor Alec Baldwin formally charged with involuntary manslaughter in the shooting death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set of his film Rust. More details on the charges and the possibility of prison time for Baldwin. Plus, the city of Memphis is preparing for the funeral of Tyre Nichols. That includes welcoming Vice President Kamala Harris, who plans to attend the service. Funeral comes as a deadly ice storm blankets parts of the South, forcing airlines to cancel more than 1,500 flights. Also tonight, the manhunt continues in Oregon. Police are on the lookout for Benjamin Foster, who's been accused of torturing a woman, the latest on the ongoing investigation. And Plan B for Plan B. Colleges are putting vending machines for the contraceptive on campuses. We'll take a closer look at this growing trend. Prosecutors in New Mexico have officially filed charges of involuntary manslaughter against actor Alec Baldwin. He's charged in the death of Halyna Hutchins on the Rust movie set back in 2021. Also charged the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Now, while rehearsing a scene, Baldwin was pointing a gun at the cinematographer when it went off. Hutchins was killed. The film's director was injured. In today's filing, prosecutors allege that Baldwin acted with willful disregard and that he, quote, clearly should have known the danger of his actions, which led to the death of Hutchins. Baldwin's legal team has promised to fight the charges, which could carry serious jail time. One charge has a punishment of up to 18 months in prison, while the other could mean a mandatory 5 years. NBC News correspondent Nyala Charles joins us now. Nyala, like you, I've been looking through the probable cause statement from prosecutors. To me, two things stand out. One, the actions they say Baldwin took that day, but also Baldwin's firearms training prior to this incident. So let's start with that. What is it prosecutors are saying about Baldwin's training?
Joe, according to that document, Baldwin was not present for required firearms training prior to filming and had limited training in firearms, saying Baldwin was distracted and talking on his cell phone to his family during training. The criminal complaint also says Baldwin failed to demand at least 2 safety checks where the armorer is supposed to show the actor the firearm, pull the bullets out in front of them, and confirm there are no live rounds. The court document says if Baldwin would have done those required safety checks and not pointed the gun at the crew, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. It goes on to say that as a veteran actor, Baldwin should have assumed the gun was loaded as a matter of gun safety. Joe?
Let's talk about what prosecutors say that actually happened on the day of the shooting, and why is it prosecutors feel that Baldwin should be held responsible?
The court document says Baldwin, by act or omission or failure to act in his position as a producer, directly contributed and or failed to mitigate numerous reckless and dangerous actions during a very short time period. The district attorney is also pushing back on Baldwin's claims in interviews that he didn't fire the gun. The document says they have an FBI lab report that shows the actor did pull the trigger and the revolver didn't malfunction when Halyna Hutchins was killed. Joe?
Ella, what are we hearing from Baldwin's legal team? Is he, his attorneys, anyone from his family speaking out now?
A representative for Baldwin declined to comment on today's charges, Joe, but in a prior statement when charges were announced, said this decision distorts Halyna Hutchins' tragic death and represents a terrible miscarriage of justice. Mr. Baldwin had no reason to believe there was a live bullet in the gun or anywhere on the movie set. He relied on the professionals with whom he worked, who assured him the gun did not have live rounds, saying they will fight those charges. Baldwin is expected to make his first court appearance in 2 weeks. Joe?
Nyala, you know, the district attorney's office says the focus, at least in their mind, is to get justice for Hutchins and Hutchins' family. Do we know how her family is responding to this today?
Well, Hutchins' family has said it supports the prosecutor's decision to seek charges. She's survived by her husband and her son, who was just 9 years old when she died. Joe?
All right, Nyla Charles, thank you so much for kicking us off this hour. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Stanley Savalos to talk about this further. So what stands out to you in these filings? Do you think prosecutors are presenting a good case here?
No, and I've made no secret about that. I try to be objective, but I just can't not take a side on this one, because I just think from the start, the prosecutor's theory of liability has holes in it. They have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And their thinking is that they don't even need to look for the person who actually brought the round, the live round, to set. Now, of course, that isn't going to appear in the complaint. That's not going to be in the charging documents. But that is going to be a major problem once they get to trial, because a defense attorney can argue to the jury that, hey, the prosecution, they focused on Baldwin. They didn't even bother looking for the real killer, the person who either negligently or maybe even on purpose brought a live round to a set. And I've spoken to many experts, Joe. They all uniformly say, whether they're on Baldwin's side or the prosecution side, they all say the same thing. There should never, ever, ever be a live round on a film set.
I mean, prosecutors are basically saying when it comes to Baldwin, hey, this was a rehearsal, so there should have only been a plastic gun or replica gun used. Therefore, Baldwin is in trouble here. Do you agree with that argument, or do you see holes in it?
This is exactly what I'm talking about. And you're reading from the complaint there, this is the prosecutor's own words. And those words imply that somebody, not Baldwin, was involved in bringing the gun. Because we all agree that Baldwin didn't bring his own gun. We all agree, including the prosecution, that Baldwin didn't load the gun. Baldwin was handed the gun. And it appears that he was handed the gun after being told by different people that it was a cold gun. So there you have the prosecution's own words seemingly harming their own case, because they describe the actions of someone that is not Baldwin. Maybe it's the armorer, and that strengthens their case against the armorer. I think they have a stronger case against her.
That's what I was just going to ask. So
Yeah.
we have to note here, it's not just Baldwin who's charged. The film's armorer is Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, also faces involuntary manslaughter charges. She's the person who handled the guns and the weapons on set. How do you compare the two cases here?
I think the armorer case is a stronger one to make, because the armorer, it's in the name. She's the person responsible for the firearms on the set. And I've spoken to experts in armorer experts, movie stunt experts, as I'm sure you have too, throughout the course of this case. And they all uniformly say that, look, the people responsible are either the first assistant director or the armorer. Some of them say Baldwin had some responsibility to check the gun, which shocked me. But here's the important thing, Joe. Because I find people on both sides with expertise in the industry, that means the defense will be able to find an expert who will take the stand, raise their hand, take an oath, and say, I'm an expert with, say, 20 years in the movie industry, and Baldwin had no responsibility for checking the firearm because he's an actor. And when that happens, it's a coin toss, because the jury will either believe the prosecution's expert, whether it's the FBI or somebody else, or they will believe Baldwin's expert. And let me add one more thing. That expert, I'm sure they'll be able to find an expert that will say this gun could have gone off without pulling the trigger. Maybe if you cock it just halfway back. I don't know. I'm not a firearms expert.
And prosecutors are saying they don't think that's possible. They think that the trigger was pulled here.
They're relying, first of all, they're relying on an FBI report. And just because it's the FBI, look, the FBI are good at what they do. It doesn't mean they are the definitive authority on firearms. Like I said, if they can find, Baldwin's team can find an expert, a credentialed expert in the industry or someone who knows firearms to get on the stand and say, no, the FBI report's wrong. Here's why Baldwin could have discharged the gun without touching the trigger, and goes through a nice demonstrative exhibit. I'm thinking ahead, they could have a diagram, how it would work, maybe even a demonstration. That may be reasonable doubt right there, Joe.
All right. Danny Savalos, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis on this one. The funeral for Tyre Nichols will take place tomorrow morning, and tonight his family, his friends, and the entire Memphis community are preparing to say goodbye. The White House confirms that Vice President Kamala Harris will attend, so will relatives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Just yesterday, we learned that a total of 7 officers were relieved of duty the day after Nichols was beaten. We already knew about the 5 who were fired and charged with second-degree murder, among other charges, but we didn't know about the other 2 officers who so far have not been charged. Also yesterday, the fire department terminated 3 employees, EMTs, who responded to the scene. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Memphis. Priscilla, this funeral is scheduled for tomorrow morning. We now know Vice President Harris is going to be in attendance. Who else will be there, and what can we expect?
That's right, Joe. The funeral will be here at this church tomorrow morning. In addition to Vice President Kamala Harris, we now know that the family of Breonna Taylor will be in attendance, and also the family of George Floyd. In terms of the eulogy, Reverend Al Sharpton is expected to deliver that, and there will also be a call to action as this community continues to demand justice and to call for change. And we've seen some of that over the past 24 hours as people seek to memorialize Tyre Nichols here, leaving teddy bears, balloons, and flowers at the street corner where all of this happened just a few weeks ago. And so this community really preparing to say goodbye on what will surely be a very difficult day here tomorrow for both the family and the community. Joe?
Priscilla, just yesterday we learned those 2 additional officers were relieved of duty. One's been identified as Preston Hemphill. The other has not been identified yet. Is there anything new we're learning about them today, and any chance those 2 officers could face charges?
So we did ask the Memphis Police Department specifically who that 7th officer was, and they declined to name him. What they have said is that they didn't initially name either the unidentified officer or Preston Hemphill because the investigation is still ongoing and because those officers have not been fired. But of course, we know that Hemphill's name actually appeared in an affidavit, and that is how many people on the ground here began looking into him and were able to identify him, which is why the department ultimately came out and identified him publicly. But still so many questions as this investigation continues. And one thing that the district attorney has made very clear, he is looking into everyone who was there at that scene, and there could certainly be additional charges, Joe.
So any idea what we can expect when it comes to this investigation in the coming days?
Yeah, so the Memphis Police Department has said that within the next few days, we should expect to see some additional personnel action. Unclear if that means other officers being placed on leave or if that means finding out who that 7th officer was and finding out what, if any, consequences that officer or Preston Hemphill could face. In addition to that, there's an ongoing investigation happening within the Shelby County Sheriff's Office. 2 deputies there have been suspended. So we're waiting to hear what's going to happen with that as well. And all of this, as Attorney Ben Crump is saying, that there may be additional victims of the Scorpion unit. So it remains to be seen if we could see lawsuits or additional claims brought against other members of that unit as all of this continues to play out, Joe.
All right, Priscilla, thank you so much. Now to the Alec Murdaugh murder trial. Today, prosecutors honed in on 5 words the suspect allegedly said when he first saw graphic photos of his murdered son. Quote, "I did him so bad." The now disbarred lawyer from South Carolina is accused of murdering his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul, in 2021. NBC's Katie Beck has the latest.
Well, Joe, a lot of the conversation in court on Tuesday surrounded a 5-word statement that Alec Murdaugh made to investigators that night as he was being interviewed. 2 very different interpretations of what was said and what was meant. Now, prosecution witnesses say what they heard from Alec Murdaugh was, "I did him so bad," referring to his son, Paul, a potential confession coming from Murdaugh in that interview. They say they didn't follow up, but made a mental note of it. The defense arguing that it could have been they did him so bad, and that if it was in fact a confession, why didn't investigators pry further and ask more questions of Murdaugh at that time? Investigators say they simply made a mental note and said it was something that we're going to have to investigate later. Here's some of that conversation from the stand.
Tell the jury, if you ask Alec Murdaugh on August 11th, 2021, what did you mean back on June 10th when you said, "I did him so bad"?
We didn't make it to that point, sir.
You would agree the jury gets to decide what he said on that tape. That's the best evidence.
I agree that they get to hear the tape and make their own mind up as to what he said. Yes, sir.
Later in the afternoon, cell phone forensic experts took the stand to talk about text messages and phone calls that were exchanged between Alec and Maggie's phone on the night of the murder. One interesting thing they brought up was that Maggie's phone was actually found in airplane mode. They also say that there was a failed attempt to unlock Maggie Murdaugh's phone with facial recognition about an hour before Alec Murdaugh called 911. Joe?
All right, Katie, thank you so much. 6 states have agreed to cut back on water from the Colorado River. Part of the proposal focuses on Lakes Meade and Powell, major reservoirs on the river. It also expands on something that each state already does. When the lakes drop to a certain level, each state is required to use less water. This proposal would raise that threshold, triggering water reduction efforts sooner. Well, this is progress. Negotiations are still ongoing. That's partly because the state using the most water is holding out. That's California. Officials there say they will release their own proposal soon. Agriculture, drought, heat waves, and population growth are all straining the biggest sources of water. Whatever deal these states agree to will determine the future of living in the Southwest for 40 million people. Still to come, snow, freezing rain, and sleet. There is some pretty nasty weather in the South, and millions are dealing with dangerous conditions on the roads right now.
The main roads are pretty slick, but nothing like the side roads. They're way worse. When we was about to go off our dirt road, I really thought we was going to hit the ditch.
The South is stuck in the grips of a winter ice storm tonight, and it is only expected to get worse as the week wears on. Sleet and freezing rain turn Texas roads and bridges into ice rinks without the ice skates. Cars slid uncontrollably and crashed on highways. Austin police say at least one person was killed in a weather-related accident, and the wintry mix and freezing temperatures will continue tonight. Some roads could become nearly impossible to drive on. Up to half an inch of ice is expected in parts of North Texas. The winter storm warning blankets 30 counties and has now been extended through Thursday. Roads were just as bad in Arkansas today. A semi-truck overturned on I-40, blocking traffic there. Several cars slid off the highways into ditches. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders called in the National Guard. At least 65 members have been deployed to help drivers stuck on those icy roads. Joining us now from Forest City, Arkansas, is NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas. Guad, Arkansas is getting hit really hard by this ice storm. What are the conditions like right now where you are?
Joe, you're talking about the ice. I've been picking up some of these branches that have fallen off some of these trees, and look how easily these come apart when they're frozen. This is how thick the ice is. That's about half an inch thick, and everything around me is frozen. This is I-40. This is the highway where we had that accident earlier. There's about 15 miles of traffic down the road, and what we see now is a lot of trucks, commercial vehicles that are carefully making their way. Authorities have, of course, asked people to stay indoors because of the dangers. We've seen, even as you move east here into Tennessee, we've seen about 1/4 of an inch thick ice in some parts, and that can be very dangerous. It makes these roads much more hazardous, of course, and the bridges and the overpasses are also very dangerous areas, and also for people that are walking around. So for now, these are the conditions. We did see a few hours of sleet coming down here in Arkansas, and the forecast indicates that we could have more of this come down overnight. So this ice storm warning continues into tomorrow here, Joe.
So, Guad, you are in Arkansas, nearby in Texas. The fragile power grid did hold there last night, but how much more is that state going to have to endure tonight?
Right. So, you know, this storm is hitting the entire region from Texas into Oklahoma, Arkansas, and into parts of Tennessee and even Kentucky. In fact, it was Arkansas where we saw a couple thousand people lose power today. But like you mentioned, in Texas, it was able to hold on. But, you know, there's large cities in Texas, and we've seen the images. We know that they, you know, as of this morning, we got a number just from overnight numbers. They had more than 140 multiple vehicle collisions that they had to go attend to. And of course, you know, throughout the day, we've been seeing the images of more accidents. The governor spoke to people in Texas, and here's part of what he said. This is the message from the governor.
As it concerns the roads, as you might, you know, perceive, driving conditions are extremely dangerous right now because of icing. Many roads in Texas will remain very dangerous for the next 24 to 48 hours.
So when they talk about this ice, it's so hard to identify. Joe, this morning when I woke up after reading and watching videos about the ice, as soon as I stepped outside, I didn't see one spot on the sidewalk, and I almost fell, even though I was keeping that in mind. So that's how dangerous it can be for people walking and, of course, those driving. So the advice is for people to stay indoors and wait it out, Joe.
Definitely have to be careful. Guad Venegas, stay safe. Thank you for your reporting. Appreciate it. Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns with the forecast. And Bill, let's start where Guad is in the south. It is rough there, and it's not over yet. What can they expect?
You can see it and hear it, right? The ice is on the trees. At the same time, you hear that little ting, 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 ting. That's all the sleet. And that's just, sleet is better than freezing rain, but it's still slippery. You can still get slip and falls. I'm sure the emergency rooms were filled in many of these areas, and the roads were actually slick. But you don't lose power. And that's what we haven't had happen in our first 2 days of this event. Primarily, it's been a lot of sleet. So we've had the accidents, we've had the airport closures, but we haven't had the power outages yet, because that should come tomorrow, unfortunately. So areas like Fort Smith, Little Rock, Memphis, all below freezing. Notice Texarkana and Shreveport, so far so good. You're above freezing, no issues there. But Austin to Waco to Dallas, this area has been below freezing. There's a glaze of ice from freezing rain and sleet in these locations. The worst of it is in between Little Rock and Memphis southwards here, down towards Greenville, Mississippi. This is where we have steady freezing rain taking place right now. So here's the timing on everything. So when we talk about the ice, that's going to be shown in the pink. Typically, we show you, the blue and the white is snow, but this is very little snow to be seen. The yellow is the rain, the heavy rain in areas that could even deal with some flooding in Louisiana. But this is the problem tonight into tomorrow. Freezing rain, especially central Texas from Dallas towards Fort Worth. And then tomorrow night, we'll get another round towards Memphis. So this accumulates, this builds up on the branches, and that's where we start to get the weight really building up, and that's when we start getting the power outages. So ice storm warnings almost from Tupelo to Memphis to Little Rock to Greenville, a huge area here. And then the winter storm warnings continue in central Texas. And this is the key. This is additional ice. So, Guav's already shown us we already have about 1/4 inch on the trees in Memphis. And if we get another 1/10 to 1/4 inch, that's when we start to get in the real extreme problems. Areas from Dallas to Waco, south of there, we're pinpointing around San Angelo, some of the heaviest. So here's how the scale of this goes. Up to now, you get about 1/4 inch. You get the slick roads, the bridges, hazardous travel. But when we up this and get towards a 1/2 inch, that's when we start to see the weight really getting on the tree limbs. That's when they snap and they break. When you get above a 1/2 inch, that's when we get extreme ice storms. That's days without power. And that's when we get things like on houses, gutters starting to break and things like that.
Bill, this is not the only extreme cold event that is going to be coming. We are due in the Northeast. Overdue. Yes. and we're about to get that, right?
Yeah, this happened. I mean, usually you get really extreme cold outbreaks in the Northeast a couple times a winter. We had one around Christmas, if you remember. It's been an extremely warm January, and it looks like a pretty warm February is heading our way too. But we're going to get one Arctic Express, Siberian Express, however you want to, the terminology. It's coming. Friday will move in Friday night, and then when you wake up Saturday morning, this is the temperature in Burlington, Vermont, -17. Bangor, Maine, -21. And these aren't misprints. The wind chills will be approaching -50. So that's like you go outside with bare skin, and you're talking 5-10 minutes. You can get, you can really get some real problems with circulations issue and the skin. The frostbite's a big, huge issue. And then Philadelphia to New York, it's cold, but it's not northern New England cold. And then by the time we get to Sunday morning, it's still chilly, but it warms up dramatically throughout much of the region. So it's not here to stay all weekend. Saturday's your indoor day. And as I was mentioning, here's the February forecast outlook. And Joe, the eastern half of the country, it looks warmer than normal. So for everyone that's been waiting for that first snowstorm from, Philly, D.C., New York, no, it may not be happening.
Oh, my goodness. And that's going to be a quick, frigid express.
Yeah, Saturday indoor day.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. After the break, an NBC News exclusive, an investigation into why federal agencies did not act sooner in response to warnings about a Capitol insurrection. Plus, he says he's not resigning, but he is stepping back. An update on embattled Congressman George Santos. And 2 missing monkeys were just found. We have an update from the Dallas Zoo. That's all just ahead. Time now for some of the big headlines we are watching tonight. Today, a suspect who works for the Parks and Rec Department in Washington, D.C., turned himself in connection with the shooting death of a 13-year-old boy. Police say the man believed someone was tampering with cars near his home. He now faces a second-degree murder charge. We're getting our first look at video deposition of former President Trump pleading the fifth more than 400 times. Last August, Trump sat for under oath questioning from New York State Attorney General Letitia James. It was part of the Attorney General's civil fraud investigation into the Trump family business. Embattled Congressman George Santos says he will step down from his committee assignments. The decision comes amid multiple ongoing investigations into his finances and other issues. But Santos says he is not considering leaving office, despite numerous calls for him to do so. Here he was on One America News earlier today. Say goodbye to the Queen of the Skies. Boeing delivered its last 747 jumbo jet today. The iconic aircraft is credited with revolutionizing travel by connecting new international routes and democratizing passenger flights. And come May 11th, both the national emergency and public health emergency for COVID will officially end. This means the millions of Americans who received free vaccines and COVID tests may not be able to get them for free any longer. The public health emergency was first declared by the Trump administration way back in January 2020. The U.S. emergency declaration for Mpox, the virus that used to be called monkeypox, ends today. Mpox has quietly calmed down from its peak in August, back when we saw nearly 500 cases a day. Today, that number is less than 5. It's a remarkable feat, but how did we get here? NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal has the answer.
James Ferguson says he was among the first Indiana residents to contract Mpox back in June of last year.
I had a pretty severe case of it, so I ended up with 55 open lesions the size of a dime to a quarter. They took weeks to heal.
The treatment, including an extensive quarantine period, took its toll.
Having to be quarantined for 6 weeks. There's a depression that comes with that.
Shortly after his diagnosis, Ferguson started to see messaging about the disease online.
I think that really did a lot to bring awareness and why we're now able to say that this is something that's no longer a huge concern.
Today, the Biden administration is no longer calling Mpox a public health emergency.
The way that the vaccine strategy evolved represents a nimble response to what we were seeing on the ground. It wasn't like other Mpox outbreaks. This one acted a lot differently.
That's Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, the White House deputy coordinator for the Mpox response. He says there were 3 key things that led to this success. 1, having enough vaccines for at-risk populations. 2, clear messaging that led to behavioral changes. And 3, immunity from those infected. What are some lessons you think we've learned about outbreaks going forward?
I remember when I first landed here at the White House, having the president say to me, how can we make the community of gay, bisexual, other men who have sex with men, and LGBT folks, how can we make them know that we are concerned about this and care? Starting with community and then worrying about how do we get the numbers down. That's an important lesson for me, and I think for others, in terms of how we approach outbreaks.
The Mpox vaccines began rolling out in August of 2022. Messaging by public health officials about Mpox was complicated. There was fear it would create a stigma around the LGBTQ+ community.
Working really hard to make sure that we don't land stigma in that community the way that other diseases have had stigma land in that community has been a really guiding principle of how we do the work.
Messaging aside, history offers a clue as to why the gay community reacted so quickly to Mpox. The HIV/AIDS epidemic predominantly impacted gay men. That health emergency may have mobilized them to respond quickly to another disease affecting their community.
So it's no surprise, given our exposure to all these other things in society that seem to be a problem statistically for our community, that when something like monkeypox gets thrown at us, we know exactly what to do. It's nothing new.
According to an online survey of gay, bisexual, and men who have sex with other men conducted by the CDC, in response to the Mpox outbreak, 48% reduced their number of sex partners, 50% reduced one-time sexual encounters, and 50% reported reducing sex with partners met on dating apps or at sex venues. While Ferguson has recovered from Mpox, he still has marks from the disease.
Eventually, if somebody's going to see you naked and you have, 55 scars, you have some explaining to do. It is something I'll probably have to explain to future partners.
Even though the scars won't go away for some, the combination of a rapid response by officials and those at risk certainly helped curb the spread.
Our thanks to Dr. Sayal for that report. Well, much of the attention over January 6th has been focused on former President Trump. Investigators are now highlighting what the government did wrong. The chief investigator for the January 6th committee is now telling NBC News that federal agencies had the intel to prevent the attack. NBC's Ken Delanian sat down with him for an exclusive interview.
The images of the attack on the Capitol stunned America and the world. And tonight, in an exclusive interview, the chief investigator of the January 6th committee says the government could have prevented it.
Had law enforcement agencies acted on the available intelligence, do you believe the attack on the Capitol could have been successfully repelled?
I think it would have been a lot different had law enforcement taken a more assertive, protective posture. The intel in advance was pretty specific, and it was enough, in our view, for law enforcement to have done a better job operationalizing a secure perimeter. To you, he said he understands the Vice President has no role. Yes. Okay.
Former federal prosecutor Tim Hafey conducted most of the big interviews for the committee's public hearings.
Law enforcement had a very direct role in contributing to really the failures, the security failures that led to the violence.
People familiar with the committee's work tell NBC News members downplayed that finding because they wanted to keep the focus on former President Trump. Committee members dispute that. Hafey would not discuss internal deliberations.
Was this an intelligence failure?
It was not an intelligence failure.
We just had protesters. Chief Circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Hafey says the committee found the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies did not act on the intelligence they had, including this online threat forwarded to Capitol Police January 5th, calling on thousands to go to Washington and help storm the Capitol. In a statement to NBC News, the FBI said it sent all the intelligence it had to the Capitol Police. DHS and Capitol Police say they've taken steps to make sure threat intelligence is better analyzed and shared.
Hafey told us he agrees with the committee's conclusion about Mr. Trump's role in sparking the riot, but he hopes the focus on the former president doesn't ease the pressure on federal agencies to fix what went wrong.
All right, Ken, thank you so much. File this under things I didn't think I'd be saying tonight. 2 emperor tamarin monkeys were missing and have now been found, located by the Dallas police. More details will be released tomorrow, but it caps a bizarre investigation. The Dallas Zoo announced the monkeys had vanished from their enclosure and that there was clear evidence their habitat had been intentionally compromised. NBC's Morgan Chesky is in Dallas with the latest.
Good evening. Just an incredible update from the Dallas Zoo tonight, sharing the news so many people were waiting for, and that is that their beloved emperor tamarins, Bella and Finn, have not only been located, but are on their way back to the zoo after being reported missing and then believed to have been taken for about 36 hours. The 4th animal incident in about 2 weeks' time at the zoo, really the latest in a bizarre turn of events. Now, we're still awaiting details from Dallas police and the zoo, but the zoo says that both of those monkeys were located this evening, and we know that right now they will be inspected by veterinarians and then taken back to that habitat at the Dallas Zoo, where they believe someone took them somewhere, either in the early morning hours of Monday or Sunday night. And this caps off what has been a wild few weeks for the zoo, dating back to January 13th. That is when their clouded leopard Nova was initially reported missing before being returned to her habitat. And then we had the death of an endangered vulture that happened on January 21st. Because of those incidents, the zoo says they had upped security, increased foot patrols, and yet early Monday morning, much to the horror of zoo staff, 2 of their tamarins were reported missing, and then their habitat had been found to have been, quote, compromised. Now, Dallas police have been working hand in hand with the zoo this entire time. There is still one man they released a photo of that police say they would like to speak to, but they are not calling him a suspect or person of interest at this time. However, tonight, everyone is confidently able to say that these two missing monkeys that had been followed all over the world are headed back home. We'll send it back to you.
All right, NBC's Morgan Chesky. Morgan, thank you so much. After the break, we are talking about your health tonight. First, new restrictions on gender-affirming care for transgender minors signed into law in one state. Plus, Plan B vending machines, how some universities are making access to emergency contraception much easier.
After Roe v. Wade was overturned, we felt a lot of passion in making sure that people felt supported on this campus.
A new Utah law that bans gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth is about to face some legal challenges. The National Center for Lesbian Rights and the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah say they plan to file a suit in the coming weeks. Utah's new measure was just signed into law on Saturday. It prevents minors from receiving gender-affirming surgeries. It also puts an indefinite moratorium on access to puberty blockers and hormone therapy. In a statement, the ACLU says it will use, quote, every avenue necessary, including litigation, to fight this ban. Similar challenges are already underway in Arkansas and Alabama. NBC Out reporter Joe Yerkeba joins us now with more on this. So, Joe, let's walk through this new ban in Utah. First of all, we should note the governor here, a Republican governor, a year ago vetoed a bill that would have banned trans students from playing girls' sports, saying he was worried about suicide at the time. But now he's signed this one. What's the response to this from trans kids, from their families, and those who provide medical care to them?
Yeah, the response has been really strong and negative. Trans kids and parents and their parents are really afraid right now. And I think part of that is because this law is really unprecedented in its scope. So it not only bars care for minors, but it also specifically targets providers. For example, it requires them to undergo 40 additional hours of training by an approved organization, is the language the bill uses. And then it will also allow minors who receive care from them to sue them for malpractice until the minor turns 25 if they change their mind about the care. So it's really unprecedented in the way that it both limits care for minors and also targets providers.
So this goes further than a lot of the bills that we've seen signed or discussed around the country then.
Right.
All right. Yeah. Let's talk more about that. The Human Rights Foundation says more than 300 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in state houses across the U.S. last year. We know a number of them targeted transgender youth. Let's break down the impact of these bills and of the legislation. First, talk about the mental health impact.
Sure, yeah. We have some stats here from the Trevor Project. They recently did a survey of trans and non-binary youth about the impact of this legislation on their mental health. And 93% of trans and non-binary youth said that they're worried about being denied access to gender-affirming medical care. 91% said they're worried about being denied access to a bathroom, and 83% said that they're worried about being denied the ability to play sports due to state or local laws. And then, trans youth just tell me that this affects their day-to-day lives. It keeps them from sleeping. It makes it hard for them to perform in their classes. They have trouble forming relationships. So this really has a widespread impact on their lives.
Just overall, what's at stake here when trans youth can't get the gender-affirming care they need?
Well, their mental health obviously is at stake, like we just discussed, but it's also just their ability to feel like they can be themselves out in public, their ability to feel accepted, to feel like they have a safe space at school. So it's really just, their really basic ability to feel like they can be who they are without any repercussions.
You have talked to many trans youth over the years, and they'll tell you the thing that can bring them the most joy is getting that gender-affirming care, right?
Exactly, yeah, getting that care, because really that's only one part of who they are. So when they have that care, they can do all the other things that they love to do, whether that's sports, art, all of those things.
All right, Joe Yerkeba, thanks so much for your reporting and for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It has been 7 months since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a decision that ended nearly 50 years of federal abortion rights protections. Well, that prompted some college students to make emergency contraception a priority. And they're getting creative. More and more students on college campuses are getting Plan B, the emergency contraceptive pill, through vending machines. That includes a campus located just blocks from the White House. Students at George Washington University can now buy these pills along with other wellness products in the vending machines like Advil and tampons. Student leaders worked for months to get the machines on campus. That meant surveying 1,500 students.
Not a lot of pushback. The only concern was about discreetness and how we could make sure that students felt that it wasn't a very public way to go and get some type of contraceptive.
Which is why the vending machines were placed in the basement of the student center. The two student leaders behind the effort say they got the idea from other schools testing out similar machines. One of the first was at Boston University. It's located at the bottom of the student union next to more traditional vending machines. Last year, our NBC Boston affiliate spoke to the leaders of Students for Reproductive Freedom. They say they saw a similar machine at Brandeis University, and after that, they were all in. Since its debut, the machine at Boston University has dispensed more than 1,000 emergency contraception pills. There, students can get them for just over $7.
We just wanted something that was like low cost, easy to access.
Right now at George Washington University, the pills cost $25, but they hope to bring down the cost. These machines come at a time when many in the U.S. are concerned about reproductive rights. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade last year reignited the debate over the right to abortion. More than a dozen states have banned abortions or no longer have facilities where abortions can be performed. It's why some students are pushing for these Plan B vending machines.
After Roe v. Wade was overturned, we felt a lot of passion in making sure that people felt supported on this campus.
The American Society for Emergency Contraception says more than 24 universities have vending machines filled with emergency contraception right now. Students for Life of America, which opposes abortion rights, says the decision to sell emergency contraception this way, quote, undercuts women. Up next, we are turning our attention to space. The U.S. is looking to get back on the moon, even to Mars in the not-so-distant future. And before we go, a look at two astronauts who are getting us ever closer to those seemingly distant goals. We're back with breaking news out of Oregon tonight. Police appear to be zeroing in on 36-year-old Benjamin Foster, the focus of a week-long manhunt. He is accused of kidnapping and torturing a woman. These are pictures from a scene over in Grants Pass, Oregon, where police are attempting to locate Foster. Grants Pass police also released this picture on their Facebook page. They say it shows Foster in the Grants Pass area this morning walking a small dog. Now, police there have been searching for Foster for a week now, calling him extremely dangerous. They released these photos of him earlier this week and warned he might try to change his appearance to evade authorities. Investigators also say he could be active on dating apps to either lure someone to help him escape or to potentially find more victims. Foster has been on the run since last Tuesday after police responded to a call about an assault at a home in Grants Pass. There, they found a woman who was unconscious with critical injuries. Authorities identified Foster as the suspect in that case. He managed to escape at the time and is now wanted for attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson, who joins us with more on these breaking developments. Steve, bottom line, we don't know a ton right now, but we do know that at least this morning, police thought it's possible this suspect was still in the area, right?
Yeah, it tells you that they're zeroing in, at least in the area of Grants Pass. Now, these images, I want to be clear, we don't know exactly what this is. This appears to be a police or, a federal marshal's area of focus. Maybe they are zeroing in on this. Maybe this is evidentiary part of the investigation that they're just following up on. You see there, it appears to be a heavy police presence. They've got some of the larger police vehicles there, and they may just be searching. Or this may be where they believe the suspect is, where Foster is. But I want to be clear, we don't know that at this point. We're in contact with the police department to try to learn more. But certainly Grants Pass has been the area of focus for now just about a week, almost exactly a week, searching for Foster, zeroing in that dragnet to try to catch this man that they call armed and dangerous, and then releasing this picture that you're seeing on screen. This is all new information to the local area. Obviously, they want to get this out to the public because because they consider this man dangerous. So anything they can do to try to locate him is all important, not only to the investigation, but to the public safety of Grants Pass and to Oregonians just in general. But if this is zeroing in, if he is in this neighborhood, this would be a week-long investigation and manhunt that has now ended in this way. But we're still waiting to learn more.
And
Joe?
if that is him in that picture walking the dog, it shows just how brazenly he might be still out and about in the town. Let's take a step back, talk about what happened a week ago. This woman critically injured last week. What do we know about the victim and how she's doing right now?
She's still critically wounded, and that should just tell you everything you need to know about how bad this was. Police describe seeing the images of how badly she was beaten as horrific. This is a woman that was found in a residence in that area literally a week ago, and still now in critical condition. We don't know exactly what was done to her. Police are just using the blanket term as torture, but it could be anything, and you don't need to know anymore, Joe. You don't need to see any pictures or hear any more descriptions. It's just looking at the faces of the authorities and the officers that have been at these press conferences, most notably the chief, that just has a look of horror on his face, that has described being emotionally disturbed by what was described that was done to this woman. And so they're taking this incredibly seriously. He has said that this will stick with him for the rest of his life. So you can bet they want to bring this man to justice. They want to find this suspect as quickly and as efficiently as they can, and hopefully they are doing that now.
And
Joe?
Steve, you know, one of the more chilling details we've learned from police in recent days was that Foster could be on dating apps. Do we know why authorities believe that's a possibility? And are these dating app companies cooperating with authorities?
It has to be the most chilling detail for the general public, because, you know, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people interact with these dating apps on a daily basis. So we don't know where it originates from, Joe. We don't know why police have zeroed in on this detail. Obviously, they believe it's a threat to the public, so they're making sure that people know about it. But they're also asking for the public's help. They're saying if they see anything that resembles this guy, and they're telling people to look not just at his appearance that you may see that we've showed you, because he could change that appearance. He could change his beard. He could change his hair. Look at the eyes. Look at the facial, the bone structure, in case that changes. We're hearing from police that he may be using these apps to either coerce a woman into helping him evade police, or to potentially scout for another victim, which is just so chilling to hear. But the word is out there. If you do see him, do not approach, and report anything that you find to police.
All right,
Joe?
Steve Patterson covering this breaking news for us. Steve, thank you so much. Turning now to space. Imagine the courage it took for two astronauts to climb into a rocket that no human has ever flown before, ultimately ushering in a new era of space exploration. Well, today, Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken were honored at the White House for their history-making flight and awarded the seldom talked about Congressional Space Medal of Honor. NBC's Tom Costello sat down with the astronauts who are inspiring America.
They may not be household names, but Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken tonight join a select group of NASA astronauts awarded the Congressional Space Medal of Honor.
Through their ingenuity and bravery, they have helped rebuild America's bridge to low Earth orbit.
Ignition. Liftoff. Go NASA. Go SpaceX. Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
May 30th, 2020, NASA veterans and best friends Hurley and Behnken rocketed off the pad, opening a new chapter in America's space frontier. After retiring the space shuttle and relying on the Russians for rides to space, it was the first human launch from U.S. territory in 9 years.
Vehicle is supersonic.
With SpaceX taking over NASA's job of carrying astronauts into space. This is a huge honor for you guys.
No, we are really extremely honored to join the presence of the astronauts that have come before us.
They join a gallery of 28 space heroes, including Neil Armstrong, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, and the crews who died in Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia. In 2020, Behnken and Hurley made history. You were really putting your lives in the hands of a company that had never flown humans before.
Absolutely. We were looking at each other going, going back and forth. Well, nobody's ever done that before. Nobody's ever done that before.
We knew the system. We trusted the folks that were building the system.
We met both men at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum.
The view is very similar to what we had on orbit.
That view, they say, changed them.
Everybody that you know and love is down there, and it's a long way home.
We've been given such a gift with this planet. We've got to take care of it, and we've got to take care of each other.
Explorers who discovered what matters most is here on Earth. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
What a great honor for those men, not just heroes in America, but heroes for the entire universe. Thanks to Tom Costello for that report. That does it for us. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow. Until then, I'm Joe Fryer for Now Tonight. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.